My daughter-in-law wrapped her clammy hand over mine to steady the pen, treating me like a toddler while she stole the house I built with my own blood and sweat. She looked at my coffee-stained shirt and saw a senile old man ready for the scrap heap. She didn't see the wolf waiting for her to step into the trap. She thought she was signing the deal of a lifetime, eager to bulldoze my wife's rose garden for a quick payout. She didn't know that in the stack of papers she was so desperate to file, I had hidden a clause that would turn her financial windfall into a prison she could never sell. But before I tell you how the trap snapped shut, pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass of whiskey or maybe some hot tea, get comfortable. And if you believe that loyalty still means something in this world, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. To understand why I did it, we have to go back to the day it all started. The roast beef was gray. That was the first thing I noticed. It sat in the center of the spode china plate like a wet stone, exuding a faint, sad steam that smelled less like Sunday dinner and more like obligation. I sawed through it. The knife scraped against the porcelain, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the hollows of my molars. Across the table, Michael was focused intently on his green beans, pushing them around with his fork as if he were looking for a landmine. He looked tired. The hairline he'd inherited from his mother was retreating, exposing a forehead creased with the specific anxiety of a man who owes money he doesn't have. "It's tender, isn't it, Dad?" Jessica asked. Her voice was too loud for the room. The dining room was built for quiet conversation, for the clinking of glass and the murmuring of old friends. It wasn't built for Jessica's projection, a tone she likely honed in boardroom meetings where she tried to convince people that downsizing was a growth opportunity. "Very tender," I lied. The meat was fibrous and tasted of aluminum foil, but I chewed it methodically. I have learned that the quickest way to end a painful interaction is to agree with it. Jessica smiled. It was a tightness of the facial muscles, not an expression of joy. She was wearing a perfume that smelled of vanilla and something chemical, like floor cleaner. It hung heavy in the stagnant air, masking the scent of the old wax I used on the floorboards. "Michael and I were talking on the drive over," she started, wiping her mouth with one of Martha's linen napkins. She crumpled it afterwards. Martha would have folded it. "About the winter coming up." I took a sip of water. "The Farmer's Almanac calls for snow. I've got the contract with the plow guy signed." "Well, that's just it," Michael said, finally looking up. His eyes were watery, apologetic. He looked at me, then darted his gaze to the sideboard, to the window, anywhere but my face. "It's not just the plowing, Dad. It's the roof. It's the heating oil. It's the stairs." "The stairs are fine," I said. My voice was flat. "For now," Jessica interjected. She reached down into her oversized handbag, leather, designer, likely purchased on credit, and pulled out a folder. She didn't open it gently. She slapped it onto the mahogany table with the heavy, decisive thud of a judge's gavel. It slid across the polished wood and came to rest on the coaster. I stopped chewing. It was a simple ceramic disc, painted white with a crude but spirited depiction of a blue jay in the center. Martha had painted it in the summer of '98, sitting on the back porch while her chemotherapy drugs dripped into her arm. Her hands had shaken that day. You could see the tremor in the jagged line of the bird's wing. She had laughed about it, calling it her abstract period. That coaster was sacred ground. It was not a place for junk mail. Jessica had placed the glossy brochure directly on top of the blue jay. "Sunrise Meadows," the text screamed in a friendly, rounded font. "A community for the third act of life." The cover featured a stock photo of a diverse group of seniors laughing over a jigsaw puzzle, bathed in lighting that exists only in heaven or photography studios. "We just think it's time to be practical," Jessica said, her hand resting on the brochure, pinning the coaster to the table. "Look at this place, Arthur. It's a fortress. You're rattling around in 5 bedrooms. The heating bill alone must be astronomical." "It's manageable," I said. I kept my eyes on her hand. Her nails were manicured, a sharp crimson. "Is it?" She leaned forward. This was the pitch. I could see the rehearsal in her posture. I hadn't had a dizzy spell. I had tripped over a garden hose because I was looking at a hawk circling the oak tree. But in their narrative, I was already half corpse, a liability waiting to fracture a hip. "Sunrise Meadows offers 3 levels of care," she continued, tapping the brochure. The impact made the china rattle slightly. Independent living, that's you. You'd have your own apartment, kitchenette, but with support. No stairs, no gutters to clean. And, she paused for effect, a dramatic beat she must have learned from television. Community, people your own age. She said people your own age the way one might say lepers. I looked at Michael. He was cutting his meat into tiny, unrecognizable squares. He knew the history of this house. He knew his mother's ashes were scattered in the rose garden 3 feet from the back porch. He knew, and yet he sat there, letting his wife cover his mother's art with a sales pitch for a warehouse for the dying. How much? I asked. Jessica blinked. She hadn't expected me to jump to the numbers. She expected resistance to the concept, emotional pleas about memories. She was ready for sentiment. She wasn't ready for audit. Well, the buy-in is significant, she admitted, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. But that's where the equity comes in. This house, Arthur, this house is a gold mine. The market is peaking. If we liquidate now, you could buy into the platinum tier at sunrise and still have a nest egg left over. Liquidate. The word tasted like a penny under my tongue. Cold, metallic. I looked at the condensation ring forming on the table. The water glass I was holding was sweating. A perfect circle of water was pooling on the mahogany, right next to the brochure. If I didn't wipe it up soon, it would leave a white mark. A scar. You've already had it appraised, I stated. It wasn't a question. Michael flinched. Just a preliminary look, Dad, just to see. Zoning, I asked. What? Jessica frowned. The zoning, I repeated, keeping my voice low and level. This is a single-family residential lot. 2 acres. You can't just sell it to anyone. You'd need a developer. We have inquiries, Jessica said, and there it was, the tell. A tiny flare of her nostrils, a quick lick of the lips. They didn't just have inquiries, they had a buyer. They had probably already spent the commission in their heads. I looked at the brochure again, the smiling seniors, the promise of worry-free living. It was an invitation to a cage. They wanted to put me in a box so they could turn my life's work into a subdivision of townhomes made of particle board and vinyl siding. I could have yelled. I could have thrown the roast beef against the wall. I could have told them to get the hell out of my house and never come back. But anger is a luxury I cannot afford. Anger makes you sloppy. Anger reveals your hand. Instead, I reached out and gently moved the brochure 3 inches to the right. I revealed the coaster. The blue jay looked up at me, its crooked wing defiant. I picked up my water glass, wiped the condensation from the wood with my thumb, and set the glass down on the coaster with a deliberate, soft clink. I suppose, I said, looking Jessica in the eye, that it wouldn't hurt to read the literature. The tension in the room snapped like a cut wire. Jessica exhaled, a sound of pure triumph. She thought the wall had crumbled. She thought the old man was folding. That's sensible, Dad, Michael said, visibly relieved. That's really sensible. Leave it with me, I said. I'll look at the numbers. If the math works, we can discuss the next steps. You won't regret it, Jessica beamed. She reached out and patted my hand. Her skin was cool and dry. It felt like being touched by a lizard. It's a win-win. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son, who was finally eating his dinner, his appetite restored by my capitulation. I looked at the blue jay. Yes, I said softly, a win-win. I finished my meat. It was still gray, still tough, but I swallowed it without grimacing. I needed the protein. I had a war to plan. When they left an hour later, the house settled back into its silence. I locked the heavy oak door and listened to the tumblers click into place, a solid, mechanical sound of security. I didn't clear the table immediately. I walked back into the dining room and stood over the empty chairs. The brochure was still there, a glossy intruder on the dark wood. I picked it up. I didn't read it. I walked to the kitchen, opened the trash bin, and dropped it in. Then I went to the drawer where I kept the magnifying glass and my notebooks. I didn't need a nursing home. I needed a structural survey of the property lines and a copy of the town's 1950 bylaws. The siege had begun, but they had made a critical error. They thought they were besieging a ruin. They didn't realize the fortress was still manned. The car that pulled into my driveway was German, silver, and kept immaculately clean. It looked less like a vehicle and more like an appliance. It crunched over the gravel I had raked smooth just yesterday, and came to a halt exactly 2 inches onto the grass verge. A small trespass, but a trespass nonetheless. Jessica emerged first, wearing a trench coat that was belted too tightly, looking like a woman preparing for a gale in the middle of a calm Tuesday morning. Michael followed, hunching his shoulders against the wind. Then came the specialist. His name was Trent. He was a man composed entirely of sharp angles and synthetic fabrics. He wore a suit that shimmered slightly in the dull December light, a shade of blue that belongs on a computer screen, not a human being. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but brief, as if he were afraid he might catch something, perhaps obsolescence. "Mr. Vance," he said, "a pleasure, truly. Great bones on this place. Great bones." He smelled of aggressive mint gum and the kind of cologne that lingers in elevators long after the wearer has departed. "Jessica is the top agent in the county for properties of this nature," Jessica said, placing a hand on the small of Michael's back, propelling him forward. "He specializes in heritage conversions." "Conversions," I repeated. The word hung in the cold air. Religious men convert souls. Alchemists convert lead. Real estate agents convert homes into assets. "Let's take a look, shall we?" Trent didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped past me into the foyer. I followed them, drifting silently over the oak floors I had laid in 1984. I felt like a specter in my own castle, a ghost haunting the corridors of a life that was still technically in progress. Trent moved with the jerky, erratic energy of a bird. He stopped in the center of the living room, spinning slowly on the heels of his polished loafers. He pulled a laser measure from his pocket, no tape measure for this generation, and shot a red dot against the far wall. "High ceilings," Trent muttered, tapping something into a tablet. "That's good. Buyers love volume. But the layout, very compartmentalized, very 20th century. It keeps the heat in," I said. "The rooms are designed to be closed off in winter." Trent offered me a pitying smile, the kind one gives to a child who explains that clouds are made of cotton candy. "Of course, but the modern buyer, they want flow, they want lines of sight." He walked over to the load-bearing wall that separated the living room from the dining room. This was a wall I knew intimately. Inside it were 3 doubled-up 2x10 headers spanning the archway. It held up the master bedroom. It was the spine of the house. Trent rapped his knuckles against the plaster. Thud, thud. "This needs to go," he declared, waving a hand through the solid matter as if he were parting smoke. "Open concept. We blow this out, put in a steel beam, maybe leave it exposed for that industrial chic look, and suddenly you have a great room. That's the selling point." I looked at Michael. He was standing by the fireplace, staring at the mantel. I knew what he was looking at. The notch in the wood where he had banged his head when he was 6, trying to play Superman off the sofa. He ran his thumb over the imperfection. "Michael," I said softly, "do you remember when we framed this wall?" Michael flinched. He didn't look at me. He looked at Jessica. I was pretty young, Dad." "You were 12, I said. "You held the level. You learned what plumb meant that day." "It's a dark room, Dad," Jessica interjected, stepping between us. She acted as a physical shield, blocking the transmission of memory. "Trent is right. It feels oppressive." "Oppressive," I echoed. We moved to the kitchen. This was Martha's domain. The cabinets were solid sherry, built by a local carpenter who had lost 3 fingers to a table saw, but could cut a dovetail joint that would hold water. They were dark, warm, and smelled faintly of nutmeg and lemon oil. Trent grimaced. "Complete gut," he said to Jessica. "I wouldn't even refinish. The wood is too dark. Trends right now are whites, grays, matte blacks. We rip this out, put in a massive island, waterfall quartz edge, and subway tile backsplashes." "Rip it out," I said. My hands were in my pockets, clenched into fists so tight my knuckles were grinding together. "It's dated, Arthur," Jessica said, her voice dropping to that reasonable, soothing tone she used when she wanted something. "It's dark. Young families want light. They want to be able to see their kids in the living room while they cook." "They can't see their kids if they knock down the wall," I noted dryly. "The dust from the demolition will blind them." Trent laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "You have a sense of humor, Mr. Vance. That's good. Moving is stressful. Humor helps." He walked over to the window that overlooked the back garden. He peered out at the hydrangeas, now brown sticks in the winter soil, and the old potting shed. That shed, Trent pointed, tear down, eyesore, but the lot, my God, the lot size. He turned to Jessica, his eyes gleaming with avarice. You could fit 2 ADUs, accessory dwelling units, back there easily, or if you subdivide, you get a flag lot. The driveway is wide enough. That's what we were thinking, Jessica said, nodding vigorously. I looked at Michael again. He was leaning against the refrigerator, his arms crossed, his chin tucked into his chest. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was 42 years old, a father of 2, a man with a degree in business, yet in this kitchen, he looked like a boy waiting for a scolding. He wasn't saying a word. He wasn't agreeing with them, but he wasn't stopping them. He was letting the current take him. And then I saw it. Jessica turned to him. Michael, show Trent the basement. The ceiling height down there is a concern. Michael hesitated. Jess, I don't know if... Just show him, honey, she said. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were flint. It wasn't a request. It was a command issued to a subordinate. Michael straightened up, let out a long, silent exhale through his nose, and nodded. Yeah, okay. Follow me, Trent. He walked past me without making eye contact, smelling of fear and fabric softener. I stood alone in the kitchen with Jessica. She was tapping away on her phone, likely calculating square footage and commission rates. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. In her mind, I was already gone. I was an encumbrance on the deed, a complication to be managed. I watched her thumb fly across the screen. I watched the way she shifted her weight, claiming the space, leaning her hip against Martha's counter. The anger that had been simmering in my gut cooled instantly. It froze into something solid and useful. For weeks I had felt betrayed by my son. I had looked at him and seen a traitor. I had seen a boy who had forgotten where he came from. But as I listened to their footsteps descending the cellar stairs, Michael leading the man who wanted to destroy his childhood home, I realized I had the battlefield wrong. Michael wasn't the enemy. Michael was the casualty. He was a man hollowed out by a decade of yes dear and whatever you think best. He was drowning in debt he didn't incur, chasing a lifestyle he didn't enjoy, married to a woman who viewed him as an asset class rather than a partner. Jessica was the hand. Michael was the hammer. She was swinging him against me, hoping one of us would break. She looked up, catching me staring. Everything okay, Arthur? Fine, I said. My voice was calm. Just thinking about the plumbing. Oh, don't worry, she said dismissively. Trent says a full repipe is standard for a flip like this. A flip. Of course, standard. I walked over to the sink and looked out at the garden. The wind was picking up, shaking the bare branches of the oak tree. It was a strong tree. It had survived ice storms, droughts, and lightning strikes. It survived because its roots went deep, deeper than anyone could see from the surface. Trent and Michael came back up the stairs. Trent was dusting off his suit jacket, looking distastefully at a cobweb on his sleeve. Good height, Trent announced. Dry, too. That's a bonus. We can list this as potential recreation space. That adds value. Excellent, Jessica said. She clapped her hands together. So, what's the timeline? If we get the paperwork moving, Trent checked his watch, a massive golden diver's watch that had likely never seen the ocean. I can have a coming soon sign on the lawn by Friday. We build the hype. Launch the listing immediately after the holidays. Capitalize on the New Year inventory shortage. Friday, Michael repeated. His voice was hollow. Friday sounds efficient, I said. They all looked at me. They were expecting the fight. They were braced for the "this is my home" speech. I gave them nothing. I'll need to clear out the study. There are papers. We can hire movers for that, Jessica offered quickly. Packers, you won't have to lift a finger. I'm sure you know the best people, I said. When they finally left, the silence that rushed back into the house felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was expectant. I watched the silver car disappear down the road. Then I turned and walked to the wall Trent had condemned, the load-bearing spine of the house. I placed my hand flat against the plaster. I could feel the vibration of the furnace running in the basement, the heartbeat of the building. Friday, I whispered to the empty room. I went to the hall closet and put on my heavy coat. I didn't need a packer. I needed a lawyer. And before that, I needed to visit the county clerk's office. If they wanted to talk about heritage, I would show them what the word actually meant. I would show them that you cannot tear out the heart of a thing without consequences. I checked my pocket for my car keys. I hadn't driven the Buick in 3 weeks, but I knew it would start. It was, after all, well maintained. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit my face, sharp and awakening. The walkthrough was over. The game was afoot. The sound woke me at 6:42 a.m. It wasn't the rhythmic singing ring of a carpenter who knows his trade, the tap-tap drive of a nail going home. This was a dull, thudding violence, metal against wood, erratic and heavy, the sound of something being forced where it didn't belong. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like the map of Tasmania. My heart was hammering a matching rhythm against my ribs. In this neighborhood, at this hour, noise meant trouble. A burst pipe, a car crash. I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were ice cold, the kind of chill that seeps through wool socks and settles in the joints. I didn't reach for my slippers. I grabbed my flannel robe, cinched the belt tight enough to cut off circulation, and moved to the window. Down below, the north garden was infested. 3 men in high-visibility orange vests were moving through the morning mist like neon beetles. They were carrying sledgehammers and bundles of wooden stakes painted with fluorescent pink tips. I watched, hand gripping the curtain, as one of them raised a sledgehammer and brought it down. Thud. He was driving a stake directly into the center of the mulch bed where Martha had planted her prize-winning peace roses in 1993. The breath hissed out of me. Those weren't just bushes, they were 30 years of pruning, feeding, and covering against the frost. They were the last living things Martha had touched before she went into the hospice. I didn't yell from the window. That's what a senile old man does. I turned, marched down the stairs, and unlocked the back door. The air outside was sharp enough to crack a lung. It smelled of wet earth and impending snow. I walked across the lawn, my boots crunching on the frost-stiffened grass. The cold bit at my exposed ankles, but I didn't feel it. I felt only a white-hot clarity. The man with the hammer stopped mid-swing as I approached. He was young, thick-necked, wearing a knit cap pulled low. He looked at me with the vague annoyance of a man interrupted in the middle of a tedious task. "Help you, Pop?" he asked. He didn't lower the hammer. "You're standing on a root ball," I said. My voice was gravel, low and steady. He looked down at his muddy work boots, then back at me. "Just following the flags, sir. Survey crew marked 'em yesterday." I didn't authorize a survey. "Work order came from the owner," he said, shifting his weight. "We're just marking the lot lines. I am the owner." He gave a half shrug, the universal gesture of the wage worker absolving himself of responsibility. "Look, buddy, I got a work order. Name on it is..." He fished a crumpled paper from his vest pocket. "Jessica Vance, power of attorney pending. We got to get these stakes in before the ground freezes solid. Power of attorney pending." She was moving faster than I calculated. She wasn't waiting for the signature. She was assuming it. "Who is the foreman?" I asked. He pointed with his chin towards a white pickup truck parked crookedly in my driveway, engine idling, spewing a cloud of diesel exhaust into the crisp air. I walked over. The truck was a mobile office, the dash cluttered with fast food wrappers and clipboards. The foreman was inside, pouring coffee from a thermos. He rolled down the window as I approached, a blast of heat escaping the cab. "Morning," he said, guarding his tone. He saw the robe. He saw the gray hair. He saw a problem. "You're tearing up my garden," I said. "We're being careful, sir," he lied. "Just laying out the preliminary subdivision markers, standard stuff." "Subdivision?" I let the word hang there. "Yeah, for the split." He gestured vaguely at the 2 acres of rolling lawn and old-growth timber. "Splitting the parcel into 2 lots, Lot A and Lot B." I looked past him, through the window, to the passenger seat. Unrolled across a stack of invoices was a large blueprint. It was upside down from my perspective, but I spent 40 years reading blueprints. I could read them in the dark. I could read them backwards. I saw the lines. They weren't just selling the house. The plan showed the existing structure, my home, shaded in gray with the notation demo/salvage. Overlaid on the land were 2 identical squares. The legend in the corner read, "The Estates at Oak Ridge, Modern Farmhouse Concepts 1 and 2. They were going to knock it down. The crown molding I installed, the height chart penciled on the kitchen doorframe, the porch where I proposed to Martha, all of it scraped into a dumpster to make room for 2 soulless boxes with white siding and black window frames, built with 2x4s and construction adhesive.
Modern farmhouses, I murmured. It's the trend, the foreman said, taking a sip of his coffee. Everyone wants the look. You get 2 units on this land, you double the yield. Smart investment. Yes, I said. Smart. I looked back at the garden. The young man had finished driving the stake. A bright pink ribbon fluttered from the top of it, a mockery of a flag planted on conquered soil. It sat right in the heart of the rosebed. I wanted to rip it out. I wanted to scream until my throat bled. I wanted to drag these men off my land. But if I did that, the police would come. Jessica would get a call. "Dad's having an episode," she would say. "He was aggressive with the workmen. It's not safe for him anymore." It would be the final nail in the coffin of my competency. I tightened the belt of my robe. I forced my hands to unclench. "Be careful with the hydrangeas on the south side. The soil is loose there. You'll lose your footing." The foreman blinked, surprised by the sudden capitulation. Sure thing, Pop. We'll watch our step." "See that you do." I turned my back on them. I walked back to the house, listening to the thud, thud, thud resume behind me. Each impact felt like it was happening inside my skull. I entered the kitchen and closed the door, shutting out the cold and the noise. I didn't make coffee. I went straight to the window and watched them for a long time. I memorized the logo on the truck, Apex Surveying and Land. I memorized the license plate. I wasn't grieving anymore. Grief is a soft thing, a wet thing. This was different. This was the cold, hard sensation of a bolt sliding into a chamber. They wanted to play with boundaries? Fine. I would teach them about boundaries. I went to the hallway and picked up the phone book. I didn't need the realtor. I needed the number for the County Historical Society, and then the number for the State Department of Environmental Protection. If they wanted to dig in my dirt, let's see what they find when I tell them where to look. The itch on my jaw was maddening. 5 days, that's how long I'd gone without a razor. In my prime, I was a man who shaved twice a day if there was a dinner engagement, once at 6 a.m. and a touch-up at 5 p.m. Smooth skin was a courtesy. It was a sign of order. Now I looked into the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger. The bristles were white, patchy, and stiff. They caught the light like frost on a dead lawn. I resisted the urge to reach for the shaving cream. This was the uniform. I went to the closet and pulled out a flannel shirt I'd worn yesterday. On the left breast, right over the pocket, was a brown, crusty archipelago, a coffee stain I had manufactured with a teaspoon of dark roast. I had let it dry, letting the fabric stiffen. It looked like the badge of a man who had stopped caring, or worse, a man who had stopped noticing. I buttoned the shirt. I left the second button from the top undone, mismatching the holes. I studied the effect. Disheveled, neglected, sad, perfect, I whispered. My voice was steady, but I practiced a waver. Perfect. When the doorbell rang at 10 a.m., I was ready. I didn't answer it immediately. I waited until the second ring, then the third. I shuffled to the door, dragging my feet slightly, killing the natural cadence of my stride. Jessica stood there, flanked by Michael. She was holding a clipboard this time, clutching it like a shield. "Dad?" Michael asked, his eyes widening as he took in the stubble. "Are you okay?" Fine, I muttered, looking past them at the driveway. "Just didn't sleep well. The wind." "There wasn't any wind last night, Arthur," Jessica said. She stepped inside, her nose wrinkling slightly as she got close to the coffee stain. She didn't say anything about it, but her eyes cataloged it. Item 1, hygiene deterioration. "Come in," I said, waving a hand vaguely. I was looking for something." We moved into the kitchen. The table was cluttered. I had deliberately spread out piles of old newspapers, junk mail, and receipts from 2019. It was a cacophony of paper, designed to look like a mind overwhelmed by administration. "We need to talk about the realtor's contract," Jessica said, clearing a space on the table with an aggressive swipe of her hand. "Trent needs the signature to get the coming soon sign up. The market moves fast, Arthur." "The market," I repeated, staring blankly at a coupon for car washes. "Yes, the market." She uncapped a pen. "Sign here and here." "I need my glasses," I said. I patted my chest pocket. Empty. I patted my pants. Empty. "They're on your head, Dad," Michael said gently. I reached up and touched the frames resting on my forehead. I feigned a chuckle, a weak, bewildered sound. So they are. Everything's going walkabout these days."
I sat down. Jessica slid the paper in front of me. It was the listing agreement. It gave Trent exclusive rights to sell my home for 6 months. "Where are my keys?" I asked suddenly, looking up. Jessica sighed. It was a sharp, impatient exhale through her nose. "You don't need your keys to sign a paper, Arthur." "No, the car keys, the Buick. I need to go to the bank." "You don't drive anymore, remember?" Jessica said. Her voice took on that lilting sing-song quality one uses with toddlers and golden retrievers. "We talked about this. It's not safe." "I drove yesterday?" I lied. "You didn't," Michael said, looking at his shoes. "The battery is dead, Dad, remember?" I stood up, putting on a performance of agitation. I began opening drawers, the silverware drawer, the junk drawer. I rattled the contents, shifting screwdrivers and twist ties. I had them, I insisted. I had them right here. I let my breathing tick up. I let my hands flutter. I was creating a scene of chaos over nothing. I watched Jessica out of the corner of my eye. She wasn't concerned. She was validated. She looked at Michael, eyebrows raised. "See?" the look said. "He's losing it. We're doing the right thing." "Dad, sit down," Jessica commanded. "We'll find the keys later. Just sign the papers so we can handle this for you. That's why we're here, to take the burden off." "The burden," I murmured. I slumped back into the chair. I reached for the pen. This was the critical moment. I let my hand hover over the paper. I targeted the muscles in my forearm, the ones I used to use to steady a surveyor's transit, and I deliberately relaxed them in a sporadic rhythm. My hand shook. The pen tip tapped against the paper, leaving little dots of black ink. Tap, tap, tap. I saw Michael look away. He couldn't watch. The sight of his father, the man who had built this kitchen, trembling like a leaf was too much for his conscience. But Jessica watched like a hawk. She didn't look away. She leaned in. "Here," she said, covering my hand with hers. Her palm was clammy. "Let me help you steady it." She guided my hand. We formed a signature that was jagged and weak, a parody of my name. It looked nothing like the firm, architectural script I used on my checks. It looked like the scrawl of a man checking out of existence. "There," she said, pulling the paper away instantly, as if afraid I might snatch it back and eat it. "All done." "I feel tired," I said. "It's the stress," Jessica said, tucking the contract into her folder. "Moving is stressful, but don't worry. Trent will handle the showings. You won't even have to be here. We can take you to the mall or the park." "The park would be nice," I whispered. "See, Michael?" she said, turning to her husband. "He's relieved. It's too much for him to manage alone. Look at this shirt, honey. Look at the table." Michael looked at me. His eyes were wet. "I know, Jess. I know. We're doing the right thing," she said firmly. She stood up, the prize secured. "We'll let you rest, Arthur. Trent will be by tomorrow to put up the lockbox. You don't need to worry about the keys. He'll have his own." They walked to the door. I shuffled behind them, keeping up the charade until the very last second. "Drive safe," I called out, my voice cracking. "Bye, Dad," Michael said. He sounded choked up. The door clicked shut. I heard the lock engage. I stood in the hallway for a full minute, listening to their car start. I waited until the sound of the engine faded completely down the street. I straightened my spine. The slump vanished. I rolled my shoulders back, hearing a satisfying pop. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the cold cup of tea I had been nursing, and poured it down the sink. My hand was as steady as a surgeon's. I went to the pantry and reached into the back of the cereal shelf behind the box of bran flakes that I never ate. I pulled out the spare set of keys for the Buick. Then I went to the drawer where I kept the real paperwork. They had the listing agreement. That was fine. Let them list it. Let them bring their buyers. Let them spend their money on marketing. I pulled out the file labeled DEP/Wetlands/1974. I walked to the mirror in the hallway and looked at the coffee stain on my shirt. It was a good prop. It had done its job. I began to unbutton the shirt. I needed a shower, I needed to shave, and then I needed to make a phone call to the State Historical Preservation Office. Jessica was playing checkers. She was jumping pieces, thinking she was clearing the board. She didn't realize that every move she made was forcing her into a position where checkmate was inevitable. "The burden," I said to the empty house, my voice deep and clear. "You have no idea."
The number 42 bus smelled of wet wool, sanitizer, and the metallic tang of overheated brakes. I sat near the back, my hat pulled low, watching the city slide by through a window etched with scratches. I hadn't taken a bus in 20 years. It was a humiliation, in a way, a surrender of autonomy. But it was a tactical necessity. The Buick sat in the garage, its odometer reading 42,103 miles. If Jessica or Michael checked it, and they would, it had to remain frozen in time. A senile man doesn't drive downtown for legal consultations. A senile man sits in his armchair and watches the dust motes dance. I got off at the corner of 4th and Main, stepping into a slush puddle that soaked the hem of my trousers. I didn't flinch. I walked 2 blocks to the professional building, a structure built in the 20s, all limestone and brass, back when buildings were designed to intimidate rather than welcome. Silas's office was on the 3rd floor. The elevator was a cage of iron grillwork that rattled upward with a reluctant groan. When I opened the frosted glass door marked Silas V. Worthing, SQ, the smell hit me. Lemon polish, old paper, and the dry, dusty heat of cast iron radiators. It was the scent of continuity. Silas was waiting for me. He was 78, a man made of parchment and wire. He sat behind a desk that looked like the deck of a galleon, piled high with files that threatened to avalanche but never did. He didn't rise. He simply looked over his tortoiseshell spectacles and nodded. "Arthur," he said. His voice was like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Silas," I replied. I took the chair opposite him. It was leather, cracked with age, and hissed as I sat. We didn't exchange pleasantries. We didn't ask about health or grandchildren. Men of our generation, men who have buried wives and retired from wars, do not waste breath on the obvious. We know the aches are there. We know the silence at home is loud. "You have the documents?" Silas asked. I reached into my coat, bypassing the pocket where I kept my reading glasses and pulling out the folded map I had salvaged from the trash, a copy of the surveyor's preliminary sketch I'd managed to snag while Jessica was distracted with the "coming soon" sign. I smoothed it out on his desk. The paper was wrinkled, coffee-stained, my own doing, but the lines were clear. "This is the plan," I said, pointing a finger at the subdivision line cutting through my rose garden. "They call it the Estates at Oak Ridge, 2 units, modern farmhouses." Silas leaned forward. He studied the map for a long time. He traced the property line with a finger that was crooked with arthritis, but steady as a calm sea. "Aggressive," he murmured. "They're maximizing the lot coverage. They'll be right up against the setbacks. They're tearing down the house, Silas. They're scraping the lot." Silas looked up. His eyes were gray, devoid of pity but sharp with understanding. "And the children? They are driving this? Jessica is the engine, Michael is the fuel. And you? I am the obstacle." Silas sat back, tenting his fingers. "So, we are not here to draft a will. You were here for a defense strategy." "No," I corrected him, "I am here for an offense." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a notebook. "I want to talk about a conservation easement." Silas's eyebrows rose, a tectonic shift on his face. He looked at me with a new appreciation. A conservation easement wasn't just a legal document, it was a scorched earth policy. It was the kind of move you made when you wanted to salt the fields so no enemy could ever harvest them. "The nuclear option," Silas said softly. "You understand the implications, Arthur. It is a restrictive covenant. It runs with the land. It binds all future owners, in perpetuity." "Forever," I said. "Forever," he agreed. "If we grant the development rights to the state land trust, that property can never be subdivided. It can never be developed beyond its current footprint. You are effectively destroying 80% of the market value of your estate." "I am destroying the speculative value," I corrected. "The home remains, the garden remains, the history remains. Only the profit vanishes." Silas nodded slowly. A small, dry smile cracked his face. It was the look of a chess master watching an opponent walk into a trap they didn't even know existed. "The tax benefits are substantial," Silas mused, shifting into his professional cadence. "You could claim a charitable deduction for the loss of value. It would offset your income for years." "I don't care about the taxes." "No, but it adds a layer of legitimacy. It makes it harder to challenge in court. If they try to claim you were incompetent, we point to the sophisticated tax planning. A senile man doesn't engage in complex estate management to lower his tax burden. A shrewd man does." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and uncapped a fountain pen. "We will need a life estate clause as well." Yes, I said. I stay in the house until I die. Exclusive possession, Silas scratched the pen across the paper. The sound was loud in the quiet room. You transfer the deed to the children now, technically giving them what they want, but you reserve the life estate for yourself. And, simultaneous to the transfer, you execute the easement. They won't read the fine print, I said. Jessica only looks at the bottom line. She sees the deed transfer. She thinks she's won. Hubris, Silas said, the oldest sin. He looked up at me. There is a risk, Arthur. If they find out before the recording date, they won't. They are too busy picking out quartz countertops for kitchens that will never be built. They think I am confused. They think I am malleable. And are you? I looked at the rows of law books on his shelves, leather-bound, heavy, filled with the codified wisdom of centuries. I am a structural engineer, Silas. I know how to calculate load. I know exactly how much weight a beam can take before it snaps. Jessica thinks she is applying pressure. I leaned forward. She doesn't realize she is standing on a trap door. Silas wrote for a few more minutes, the scratch, scratch, scratch of the pen the only sound in the room. He drafted the outline of the weapon we would forge. I will have the papers drawn up by Tuesday, Silas said. We will need to be careful with the notarization. I'll come to the house. We'll say I'm there to update your will, a standard procedure. Good. I stood up. My knees popped, a sharp reminder of the cold outside. Arthur, Silas said, stopping me before I turned to the door. Yes? This will cause a war. When they find out, they will not be kind. They are already not kind, Silas. They are just polite. There is a difference. Silas nodded. He closed the file folder on his desk. Tuesday, then. I walked out of the office and back into the hallway. The elevator rattled its way up to meet me. I felt lighter. The grief that had been sitting on my chest like a bag of wet cement had shifted. It hadn't gone away, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a burden. It was ballast. I took the bus back. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. I watched the city turn into suburbs, the buildings shrinking, the space opening up. When I got off at my stop, I walked the quarter-mile to my house. I saw the "Coming Soon" sign Trent had planted in the lawn. It was garish, red and white, sticking out of the frozen ground like a wound. I stopped and looked at it. Coming soon. Luxury development opportunity. I reached out and brushed a speck of dirt off the sign. Not if I get there first, I whispered. I walked up the driveway, careful not to slip on the ice. I went inside, hung up my coat, and sat in the dark living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I simply sat there, listening to the house settle, and waited for the next move. The kitchen table was covered in a blizzard of white envelopes, windows, envelopes with red text, past due, urgent, action required. I had saved them for months, tucking them into a drawer specifically for this moment, a theatrical prop of financial incompetence. Jessica sat across from me, sorting them into piles with the ruthless efficiency of a card shark dealing a hand. Her nails clicked against the laminate. Click, click, click. It's a mess, Arthur, she said, not looking up. The heating oil is 2 months behind. The property tax assessment. Have you even opened this? I meant to, I stammered, rubbing my eyes. I made sure my hand shook just enough to be noticeable. The print is so small these days. This is exactly what we're talking about, she said, smoothing a crumpled bill from the water company. She looked at Michael, who was standing by the sink, staring out at the gray afternoon. Michael, tell him. Michael turned. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. We just think it would be easier if Jessica handled the accounts, Dad. You know, just so you don't have to worry. Jessica slid a document across the table. It wasn't a bill. It was a heavy, cream-colored paper with a notary block at the bottom. Durable power of attorney. It's standard, she said, her voice dropping to that soothing, nurse-like register she reserved for the feeble. It just lets me sign checks for you, talk to the utility companies. It gives me the authority to manage the transition. I looked at the document. It didn't just let her sign checks. It gave her the power to sell assets, liquidate accounts, and make medical decisions. It was a blank check for my existence. If I signed that, I ceased to be a person and became a ward. I couldn't sign it, but I couldn't refuse it outright. Refusal looks like defiance. Defiance breeds suspicion. I needed a counter-gambit. I needed to offer them a piece of meat so big they wouldn't notice the hook inside it. I pushed the paper back.
just an inch. I don't know, I said, my voice thin. It feels complicated, giving up control like that. It's not giving up control, Jessica said, her eyes narrowing slightly. It's delegating. I'm tired, Jessica, I said. I let my shoulders slump, exhaling a breath that rattled in my chest. I'm just so tired of the paperwork, the taxes, the insurance. It's heavy. We know, Dad, Michael said softly. I've been thinking. Silas, my lawyer, he mentioned something. Jessica froze. The mention of a lawyer usually puts people like her on edge, but I saw her ears perk up. What did he mention? He said if the house is going to be yours anyway, why wait? I looked up, meeting her gaze with wide, watery eyes. Why wait for the probate? He said that takes years, costs thousands. Jessica's eyes widened. Probate is a nightmare, she agreed quickly. The state takes a huge chunk. Exactly, I said. So what if I just gave it to you now? The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. A branch scraped against the window. But at the table, time stopped. Jessica looked at Michael. Then she looked back at me. The greed didn't wash over her face. It sharpened it. It was a physical transformation. Her pupils dilated. She was calculating equity, appreciation, and immediate collateral. You mean transfer the deed? She asked, her voice trembling slightly, not with emotion, but with anticipation. Yes, I said. Silas called it a quitclaim, something like that. I sign the house over to you and Michael, today, or next week. You own it. You handle the taxes. You handle the bills. I wash my hands of the burden. That would certainly simplify things, Jessica said. She was trying to remain calm, but her hand was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She was mentally spending the money already. She was seeing the demolition permits being approved not in 6 months, but in 6 days. There's just one thing, I added. What? She asked, almost too quickly. I need to live here, I said. I can't go to the home yet, Jessica. I'm not ready for the smell of bleach. I want to die in this house, in my room. Jessica turned back to me. A smile broke across her face, a genuine, predatory smile. I think that's a wonderful idea, Arthur, a wonderful solution. It keeps the house in the family, and it takes all the stress off your shoulders. Yes, I said, all the stress. We can have your lawyer draw it up, she asked, or I can have mine do it. Silas has the old deeds, I said. He knows the history. It's faster with him. Fine, she said. Fast is good. She reached out and took the power of attorney form off the table. She didn't need it anymore. Why ask for permission to manage the money when you've just been handed the vault? We'll set it up, she said, standing. She was vibrating with energy. We'll pay these bills today, Arthur. Don't you worry about a thing. Thank you, I whispered. They left 10 minutes later. They practically floated down the driveway, buoyed by the weight of the fortune they thought they had just secured. I stood at the window and watched them go. They had taken the bait. They had swallowed it whole. They saw the deed transfer as a victory. They saw the life estate as a minor inconvenience, a temporary encumbrance on a prime real estate. They didn't know about the other document Silas was drafting, the conservation easement. The deed I would hand them would be for a property that could never be developed. They would own the land, yes, but they would also own the restrictions. They would own the taxes on a luxury estate that had the market value of a public park. And they couldn't evict me. I was a tenant with a lease written in iron. I walked to the sink and washed the performance off my face with cold water. Greed, I said to the reflection in the glass. It makes you blind. I dried my hands on a towel. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for them to walk into the room and sign their names. The package arrived by courier at 4 p.m. No standard mail for this. It came in a heavy cardboard envelope, sealed with a red tab that required a knife to slit. I took it into my study. This room was the only place in the house Jessica hadn't violated yet. It smelled of pipe tobacco, though I hadn't smoked in a decade, and the vanilla scent of decaying paper. The walls were lined with engineering texts, their spines cracked and faded. I cleared a space on the green baize of my desk, pushing aside a stack of National Geographics. I turned on the banker's lamp. The pool of yellow light carved out a small theater of operations in the gloom. I slid the documents out. They were clipped into 2 distinct piles.
Silas was thorough. He had used blue stickies for sign here and yellow ones for review. I ignored the stickies. I read every word. The first pile was the quitclaim deed. This was the bait. It was a standard instrument of transfer, conveying the property known as 42 Maple Drive from Arthur J. Vance to Michael Vance and Jessica Vance as joint tenants with rights of survivorship. It was simple, it was clean, it was exactly what they wanted. Except for paragraph 4, subsection B, reservation of life estate. The grantor reserves unto himself a life estate in the property for the duration of his natural life, including the exclusive right of possession and occupancy. I traced the words with my finger. Exclusive right of possession. It meant I could change the locks. It meant I could paint the walls black if I wanted. It meant that as long as my lungs drew air, they were merely guests in their own house. But the real weapon was in the second pile. This document was thicker. The paper felt heavier, like linen. Deed of Conservation Easement. I picked it up. It rustled like dry leaves in late autumn, a crisp, final sound. This was the document that would be recorded immediately prior to the transfer of the deed. By the time Michael and Jessica's names were stamped onto the title would already be shackled. I read the granting clause. The grantor hereby grants to the State Land Trust, a nonprofit corporation, a perpetual conservation easement over the property. Perpetual. A word with weight. A word that outlasts concrete. I skipped to Article 3. Prohibited uses. 1. Division of land. The property shall not be divided, subdivided, or partitioned. The property shall be conveyed only as a single unit of ownership. There went the estates at Oak Ridge. There went the flag lot. There went the profit margin. 2. New construction. No new structures, including but not limited to residential dwellings, accessory dwelling units, garages, or paved roadways, shall be constructed on the property. I closed my eyes and pictured the blueprint in the foreman's truck, the two modern farmhouses with their open concepts and waterfall islands. I watched them dissolve in my mind, erased by a single paragraph of legal text. 3. Protection of vegetation. The existing topsoil, hydrology, and native vegetation within the designated habitat zone, see Schedule A, shall not be disturbed. Schedule A was a survey map of my garden. The hydrangeas, the oak tree, the roses. They were no longer just plants. They were federally recognized environmental assets. To dig them up would be a violation of state law. I set the document down. My hands were steady. It was a death sentence for their financial windfall. They would inherit the house, yes, but they would inherit it as a museum, not a mine. They would be the custodians of a nature preserve that generated zero revenue and cost thousands in taxes, taxes they had so eagerly agreed to pay. Irony is a cold meal, but it fills the belly. I picked up the pen Silas had included, a heavy black fountain pen. I wasn't signing yet, not until the meeting, but I practiced the motion in the air. I looked at the coaster on the corner of the desk, the blue jay. "You're safe," I whispered to the painted bird. I put the conservation easement at the bottom of the stack. I placed the quitclaim deed on top. Then I placed a generic cover letter from Silas on the very top, something boring about updating estate planning. I slid the entire stack into a plain manila folder. The trap was primed. It didn't look like a weapon. It looked like bureaucracy. And that was why it would work. Jessica understood greed and she understood bullying, but she didn't understand the quiet, boring power of the fine print. I turned off the lamp. The study plunged back into darkness. Tomorrow we would sign. Tomorrow they would win the battle, and tomorrow they would lose the war. The dining room of my son's house felt less like a place where families broke bread and more like an operating theater. The walls were painted a shade of white that stung the eyes, Arctic frost or some such nonsense. The table was a slab of tempered glass resting on chrome legs, cold to the touch and impossible to lean on without leaving a smudge. Above the sideboard, a piece of art hung in a frameless void, a canvas of violent red and black splatters that looked like an accident involving a paint mixer and a golden retriever. Jessica called it kinetic. I called it a mess. I sat in a chair that was designed for posture, not comfort. It was molded plastic, hard and unyielding. "Coffee, Arthur?"
Jessica asked. She didn't wait for an answer. She placed a mug in front of me. It wasn't brewed coffee, it was one of those pod things. It had a layer of artificial foam on top and smelled of hazelnut syrup and stagnation. "Thank you," I murmured. I wrapped my hands around the mug, not to drink but to steal what little warmth it offered. Across the glass expanse, Michael sat with his head in his hands. He was wearing a polo shirt that was tight around the middle. He looked pale, his skin having the doughy, indoor sheen of a man who spends his life under fluorescent tubes. He was vibrating his leg, a nervous tic he'd had since he was a teenager. The rapid tap-tap-tap of his sneaker on the laminate floor was the only sound in the room besides the hum of the refrigerator. Jessica, by contrast, was electric.
She stood at the head of the table, organizing the papers. She moved with the jerky, erratic precision of a hummingbird hovering over a feeder. She smoothed the edges of the documents, aligned the corners, and placed the sticky flags with military exactness. "Silas sent the packet over by messenger this morning," she said, her voice bright and tight. "Efficiency. I like that." "Silas is a good man," I said. "Thorough." "Yes, well," she said, dismissing 40 years of legal counsel with a wave of her hand. "He's certainly traditional." She slid the stack toward me. It was thick. The quitclaim deed was on top, the title page bold and inviting. Beneath it, hidden like a razor blade in an apple, was the conservation easement and the recording instructions. "We just need your signature on the flagged pages, Dad," Jessica said. She placed a pen on top of the pile. It was a heavy thing, black lacquer with gold trim, a closing pen, the kind realtors give out as gifts. "Michael and I have already signed the acceptance portions." I looked at the pen, then I looked at Michael. "Michael," I said. He stopped tapping his foot. He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "Yeah, Dad? I want you to understand what this means. The house, it's a lot of responsibility. The roof, the boiler, it's not just an asset, it's a living thing." Michael swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob. For a second, just a split second, I saw the boy who used to help me rake leaves, the boy who cried when the old oak lost a limb in the storm of '09. "I know, Dad," he croaked. "We'll take care of it." "We'll hire the best management," Jessica interjected, stepping between our eye contact like a physical barrier. "Professional maintenance, landscapers. It won't be a burden to anyone. That's the point, Arthur, to lift the weight." She picked up the pen and held it out to me, uncapped. The nib glinted under the recessed lighting. "Here," she said. I didn't take it immediately. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I unfolded them slowly, deliberately. I wiped the lenses on my shirt, the coffee-stained flannel I was wearing for the second time this week. I put them on, adjusting the bridge on my nose. I leaned forward and peered at the document. "So many words," I whispered, shaking my head. "Used to be a handshake was enough." "It's just legalese, Arthur," Jessica said, her patience fraying at the edges like a cheap rope. "It just says you're transferring the title to us, and we're granting you the right to live there. It's exactly what we discussed. The life estate." "The life estate," I repeated. "And I can stay. No one can make me leave." "No one," she promised. Her eyes were locked on the paper. "It's ironclad." "And the garden?" I asked. You won't let the weeds take it?" "Dad, please," Michael said, looking pained. "We aren't going to let it rot." "No," I thought. "You aren't going to let it rot. You're going to bulldoze it." I looked at the map of the property attached to the deed. I let my finger trace the boundary line. I hesitated. I let my hand tremble, a physical manifestation of the doubt I wanted them to see. "I don't know," I said, pulling my hand back. Maybe I should read it all again." The air left the room. Jessica froze. The smile dropped from her face like a mask with a broken strap. I saw the panic flare in her eyes, the terrifying thought that the fish was spitting the hook. "Arthur," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming hard and sharp. "We went over this. Silas went over this. If we don't sign today, the filing will be delayed until after the new year. The tax implications—" "The taxes," I muttered. "Always the taxes." "It's for your benefit," she pressed. She leaned in, invading my personal space. I could smell her anxiety. It smelled like stale coffee and sweat masked by expensive perfume. "You said you were tired. You said you wanted to simplify. Do you want to go back to worrying about the assessments? Do you want to deal with the county clerk?" I looked at her. I looked deep into her eyes, searching for a shred of empathy, a glimmer of hesitation. I found nothing. I found only a calculator. She didn't care about my fatigue. She didn't care about my legacy. She cared about the square footage and the zoning density. That look was the permission I needed. If I had any lingering doubts, any moral qualms about trapping my own son in a financial dead end, Jessica's cold, dead stare extinguished them. "You're right," I said, letting out a long, defeated sigh. "I'm too old for this fight." I took the pen. It felt heavy, cold, and solid. A good tool. Jessica exhaled, a sound like a tire puncture. "Okay, right there, next to the blue flag." I lowered the pen. The tip touched the paper. The ink flowed black and wet. Arthur J. Vance. I signed the quitclaim deed. "And here," she said, flipping the page. This was the recording order. This instructed the clerk to file the documents in a specific sequence. Arthur J. Vance. "And the last one," she said, flipping again. "The deed of conservation easement." She didn't read the header. She didn't look at the text. To her, it was just page 3. She saw the signature line and the notary block Silas had already stamped. She saw the finish line. I paused. This was the kill shot. "This one feels different," I said. "It's just the addendum for the life estate." She lied. She didn't even know she was lying. She just assumed anything she didn't understand was irrelevant. "Standard procedure." "Standard," I echoed. I signed. The signature was firm. I didn't tremble on this one. I carved my name into the paper with the authority of a man closing the gate on a fortress. I capped the pen. The click was loud, a pistol shot in the quiet room. "There," I said. "It's done." Jessica snatched the papers away before the ink was even dry. She clutched them to her chest as if I might try to claw them back. A flush of victory rose up her neck, staining her skin pink. "You did the right thing, Arthur," she beamed. The mask was back in place. "You really did." Michael looked at me. He looked sick. "Thanks, Dad." "Don't thank me," I said, standing up. My knees cracked, but I felt strong. "You have what you wanted." "We'll get these to the courier immediately," Jessica said, already turning away, her phone in her hand. "Trent can get the listing live by Monday." "Trent," I said. "Yes. He'll be surprised." "He'll be thrilled," she corrected. I walked to the door. I didn't wait for them to show me out. I needed fresh air. I needed to get the smell of hazelnut and greed out of my nostrils. "I'll see myself out," I called. I opened the front door and stepped onto their porch. It was made of composite decking, plastic wood that never rotted but never lived. I walked to the curb where the taxi was waiting. I turned back and looked at the house. It was a modern box, efficient and soulless. Inside, they were celebrating. They were likely popping a cork, toasting to the millions they thought they had just unlocked. They were toasting to the destruction of my home. I patted my chest pocket. I had my copy of the receipt from the courier. "Checkmate," I whispered. The wind picked up, swirling snow around my boots. It was going to be a hard winter, but for the first time in months, I wasn't cold. I was just ready. The cork left the bottle with a wet, hollow thwomp. It wasn't the sharp pistol crack of a vintage French champagne. It was the dull thud of carbonated white wine from a screw-top era. Jessica held the bottle of sparkling cuvée like a trophy. The label was gold and peeling slightly at the corner. $12.99 at the supermarket, I estimated. Maybe less with a club card. "To us," she declared, pouring the frothing liquid into 3 flutes. "To moving forward." She handed a glass to Michael. He took it with a hand that wasn't quite steady. He looked at the bubbles rising in the glass as if they were seconds ticking away on a bomb timer. "And for you, Arthur," she said, her smile stretching tight across her face. "I know you don't drink the hard stuff anymore, so—" She produced a can of ginger ale. She poured it into the 3rd flute. The golden liquid fizzed, looking deceptively like the cheap wine, but clearer, cleaner. "To new chapters," she said, raising her glass. "To the estates at Oak Ridge." I raised my flute. The glass was light, fragile. "To the land," I said. "To the land," Michael mumbled. We drank. The ginger ale bit the back of my throat, sharp, cold, and medicinal. It cut through the cloying sweetness of the air in the room. Jessica downed half her glass in one swallow. She wasn't tasting the wine. She was tasting the commission. She was tasting the renovation budget for her own kitchen, the vacation to Cabo, the relief of debt she thought vanished the moment my pen lifted from the paper.
"I've already texted Trent," she said, setting the glass down on a coaster, a piece of slate that threatened to scratch the glass table. "He's going to run the listing Sunday night. We'll hit the Monday morning browsing traffic." "Fast," I said. "Market waits for no one, Arthur." She paced the room, the heels of her boots clicking on the laminate. Click, click, click. It sounded like a metronome set to a manic tempo. "We need to get the staging crew in. We'll need to clear out the heavy furniture. That mahogany wardrobe in your room, it has to go. It shrinks the space." "It was my father's," I said. "We can put it in storage," she dismissed. "Or auction. Antiques are niche right now."
I looked at Michael. He was standing by the window, staring at his reflection in the dark glass. He hadn't taken a second sip. He looked heavy, slumped. I felt an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with angina. It was the specific, dull pain of a craftsman looking at a piece of work that has failed. Michael was my son. I had raised him to be straight and true. I had taught him how to level a foundation and how to shake a man's hand. But somewhere along the line, rot had set in. Not a malicious rot, but a dry rot. He had become porous. He absorbed the anxieties and the greed of the people around him until he lost his own shape. He was a weak timber in a house that required steel, and you cannot build a legacy on weak timber. You have to shore it up, or you have to bypass it. "Michael," I said. He turned. His eyes were glassy. "Yeah, Dad? You okay?" "Just headache," he lied. "It's been a long week." "It's over now, babe," Jessica said, coming up behind him and massaging his shoulders. Her hands looked like claws sinking into his sweater. "The hard part is done. Now we just watch the numbers come in."
She kissed his cheek. He didn't lean into it. He stood there, a statue of a man trapped in a life he was too polite to dismantle. I finished my ginger ale. I placed the glass on the table, careful not to make a sound. "I should go," I said. Jessica whipped around. "Early? We haven't even ordered dinner. I was going to get sushi." "I'm tired," I said. "The excitement, it takes a toll." "Oh." Her face softened into that patronizing mask again. "Of course. It's been a big day. Emotional. Very emotional," I agreed. "Michael, drive your father home," she commanded. "No," I said, raising a hand. "I called a car. It's waiting at the curb." I didn't want to be in a car with Michael. I didn't want to hear his apologies or his rationalizations. I didn't want him to ask me if I was sure, because if he asked me with enough pain in his voice, I might crack. I might tell him to call Silas and stop the filing. And I couldn't do that. The lesson had to be learned. The house had to be saved. "I'll walk you out, at least," Michael said. We walked to the front door. The hallway was lined with photos of their children, my grandchildren, who were currently away at boarding school. They were smiling, strangers in uniforms. I hoped they had more of Martha in them than their father did. Michael opened the door. The cold night air rushed in, cleansing and stark. "Dad," he started. He put a hand on the doorframe. Thanks for doing this. I know you love the place. It's just a house, Michael," I said. "Walls and a roof." "Yeah," he said, relieved. "Yeah, that's all it is." He didn't understand. A house is walls and a roof. A home is a history, and a legacy is a fortress you build to protect the things that cannot speak for themselves. "Good night, Michael," I said. "Night, Dad." I walked down the path. The taxi was idling at the curb, its exhaust pluming white in the red glow of the taillights. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't need to see them pouring the second glass of that acid wine. I got into the back of the cab. The seat was worn vinyl, cracked and cold. It felt real. "Where to?" the driver asked. 42 Maple Drive," I said, "and take the long way, by the river." "The meter runs higher that way, pal." "I can afford it," I said. I just saved a fortune. As the car pulled away, I felt the physical sensation of a weight lifting off my trapezius muscles, the tension of the last month, the act, the stuttering, the unshaven face, the feigned confusion. It all evaporated. I sat up straight. I adjusted my collar. They were celebrating a harvest in a field I had already salted. They were toasting a victory in a game where the rules had been rewritten without their knowledge. Let them drink. Let them plan. Let them spend the weekend dreaming of modern farmhouses and waterfall islands. Monday was coming, and Monday is when the real world wakes up. The January frost had settled on the window panes, creating intricate, fern-like patterns that obscured the outside world. It was a Tuesday. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic shh of my brush against the leather of my boots. I was sitting in the kitchen, clean-shaven. The senile stubble was gone. The coffee-stained shirt was in the rag pile. I was wearing a pressed Oxford and a wool cardigan. I looked like myself again. The phone on the wall, the old beige rotary I refused to replace, rang. It was a jarring, mechanical sound. It didn't chirp or sing. It screamed. I didn't jump. I finished the stroke on the left boot, set the brush down, and wiped my hands on a cloth. I knew who it was. The timing was mathematical. The county clerk's office mailed out the updated deed assessments on the 15th. It was the 17th. I picked up the receiver. Hello? What did you do? It wasn't a greeting. It was a shriek. Jessica's voice was so high, so tight with hysteria that the speaker diaphragm distorted it into static. Good morning, Jessica, I said, leaning my hip against the counter. Is everything all right? Don't you good morning me, she screamed. We just got off the phone with Trent. He's pulling the listing. The buyers, the developer from the city, they walked, Arthur, they walked. Walked? I asked, keeping my voice level, the picture of bewildered innocence. Why would they do that? I thought they liked the flow? Because of the deed. She was hyperventilating. I could hear the sharp intake of breath between sentences. The title search came back. There's a restriction, Arthur, a conservation easement. Do you know what that means? It sounds official, I said. It means the land is worthless, she yelled. Worthless. We can't subdivide. We can't build the farmhouses. We can't even put up a garage. The assessment came in this morning. The property value, my God, Arthur, it dropped by 80%. 80%! I held the receiver 4 inches away from my ear. Her voice was a tinny, frantic buzz like a trapped wasp. 80%, I mused aloud, mostly to myself. Well, that should save you a bundle on the property taxes. You were worried about the carrying costs, weren't you? I don't care about the taxes, she shrieked. We needed the equity. We were banking on the development value. Trent says the land is practically a public park now. He said he can't sell a nature preserve with a sitting tenant. Sitting tenant, I repeated. That would be me. You knew, she hissed. The accusation was sharp, cutting through the panic. You knew about this. Jessica, I said, injecting a tone of weary confusion into my voice. I just signed the papers you and Silas put in front of me. You said it was to simplify things. You said you wanted to handle the burden. Silas, she spat the name. I called him. He said he was acting on long-standing instructions for estate preservation. He said we signed it. He said it was in the packet. There was a lot of paper, I said. I told you the print was very small. You old... She cut herself off. I walked over to the window and looked out at the north garden. The survey stakes were still there, those little pink flags fluttering in the biting wind. They looked foolish now. Markers for a battle that had been canceled. The gold mine was gone. The $1 million payout they had mentally spent on cars and vacations had evaporated into thin air, replaced by a piece of paper that said this land belonged to the birds and the worms as much as it belonged to them. They owned the house, yes, but they owned it the way a man owns an anchor while treading water. They had the title, but I had the utility. And thanks to their eagerness to assume responsibility, they now had the legal obligation to maintain the roof over my head for as long as I lived, on a property they could never cash out. I went back to the table and picked up the boot brush. My hands were steady. The leather was gleaming. I checked my watch. They lived 20 minutes away. If Jessica drove like I expected her to, they would be here in 15. I decided to put on a pot of coffee. Real coffee, dark roast, and I would set out the good cups, not the mugs, the china. If they were coming to declare war, I would meet them with civilization. I would sit in my chair, in my house, looking at my land, and I would let them break themselves against the walls of the fortress they had tried to steal. I whistled a low, tuneless note as I filled the kettle. The siege was over. The occupation had begun. The front door didn't open. It exploded inward. I heard the key scratch frantically against the lock plate, metal on metal, the sound of a burglar or a panicked animal before the tumblers finally caught.
The door swung wide, crashing against the rubber stopper with a violence that shook the floorboards beneath my feet. Jessica led the charge. She was wearing a camel hair coat that cost more than my first car, but at that moment she looked like a brawler. Her face was a map of fury, blotchy patches of crimson rising from her neck to her hairline. A vein in her forehead, right between her perfectly shaped eyebrows, was throbbing with a visible, terrifying rhythm. Michael trailed behind her, head down, hands in his pockets. He looked like a prisoner of war marching toward a tribunal he knew he would lose. I didn't rise. I sat in the wingback chair by the fireplace, the one Martha had bought at an estate sale in '88 and reupholstered in ox-blood leather. I had a cup of coffee in my hand, black, no saucer. "You!" Jessica hissed. She didn't shout immediately. She started with a low, vibrating tremor. "You manipulative, deceitful old bastard!" She marched into the center of the room, her heels stabbing the Persian rug. She threw her handbag onto the sofa. It landed with a heavy thud, spilling a tube of lipstick and a set of car keys. "Coffee?" I asked. My voice was calm, the casual tone of a host offering a beverage to a neighbor. "Don't you play games with me," she screamed. The volume spike was sudden, sharp enough to make the crystal in the cabinet hum. "We just came from the lawyer. We saw the filing. The easement? The conservation trust? Are you out of your mind?" "I thought you handled the filing," I said, taking a sip. "You and Michael. You were very eager to get the paperwork to the courier. We didn't read the attachments because you tricked us." She pointed a finger at me, a manicured talon. "You played the confused old man. Oh, where are my keys? Oh, the print is so small." You acted like you were one step away from the psych ward. "I never said I was confused," I corrected her gently. "I said I was tired. And I am tired of the noise." "It's fraud," she shouted. She began to pace, turning tight, angry circles in front of the fireplace. "It's material misrepresentation. We're going to sue. We'll have the deed annulled. We'll prove you were incompetent when you signed it." "That will be difficult," I said. "Why? Because you think you're so smart?" "No," I said, "because you already accepted the deed. You recorded it. And because Silas has a video recording of our meeting last week where I lucidly explained the nature of the easement to him before you arrived. He has an affidavit from my doctor dated yesterday stating I am of sound mind and body. And he has the tax documents you signed, acknowledging the charitable donation of the land rights." Jessica stopped pacing. She stared at me, her mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Michael. "Michael," she barked, "say something. He's ruining us. That property is an albatross. We're liable for the taxes, the insurance, the upkeep, and it's worth dirt." Michael looked up. His eyes met mine. There was no anger in them, only a deep, bottomless exhaustion. He looked at the man in the chair, his father, and he saw the change. He saw that my hands weren't shaking. He saw that my shirt was crisp, my jaw shaven, my eyes clear and cold as winter water. The poor old dad routine had evaporated, revealing the steel frame underneath. "He knows, Jess," Michael whispered. "What?" she snapped. "He knows," Michael said, his voice cracking. "Look at him. He's not senile. He never was." I set the coffee cup down on the side table. I placed it carefully, ensuring it was centered on the coaster. Then I stood up. I didn't use the armrests for leverage. I didn't groan. I rose with the fluid, kinetic chain of movement that a man maintains when he works with his body his whole life. I stood to my full height, 6'1", and buttoned my cardigan. The room seemed to shrink. Jessica took a half step back, her instinct overriding her rage. "You wanted the house," I said. My voice was no longer the thin, wavering treble I had used for weeks. It was a baritone, resonating from the chest. It was the voice I used to run job sites. "You sat at my table, ate my food, and plotted to bulldoze 40 years of my life. You didn't want the home, you wanted the square footage." "It's an asset, Arthur," Jessica argued, though her voice had lost its shrill edge, replaced by a desperate defensiveness. "That's how the world works. We were trying to maximize the value for the family." "For the family?"
I stepped closer. You were going to scrape the earth clean. You were going to tear out the rose bushes Martha planted when her hair fell out. You were going to knock down the wall where we measured Michael's height every birthday. I looked at Michael. He flinched. I built this house, I said, holding his gaze. I didn't just buy it. I built the deck. I framed the addition. I laid the hardwood. A house isn't just an asset, Michael. It's a repository. It holds things, memories, ghosts. You don't sell those for a quick flip. We needed the money, Dad, Michael said softly. It was a confession. We're underwater, Dad. The loans. Then you should have asked, I said. I would have helped you. I would have given you cash. I would have structured a loan. I turned my gaze back to Jessica. But you didn't ask. You assumed. You looked at me and you saw a mark. You saw a weak, stumbling old fool that you could bully into a signature. You were so blinded by the zeros on that developer's offer that you didn't bother to read the fine print. You trapped us, Jessica whispered. The reality was setting in. The wet cement was hardening around her feet. I protected myself, I corrected, and I protected this land. You own the title, Jessica. Congratulations, you are the lady of the manor. But the manor is a fortress, and I hold the only key to the gate. I have a life estate. I'm not going to a home. I'm staying right here. And you're going to make sure the roof doesn't leak, because if it does, you're violating the terms of the trust. I'll fight this, she said. But the fire was gone. It was a rote threat, a reflex. I'll drag you through court. Go ahead, I said. I have time. I'm retired. I have nothing but time and a very good lawyer. Spend your money on litigation if you want, but I suspect you don't have any money left to spend. That's why we're here, isn't it?
She stared at me with pure distilled hatred. It was a cold look, devoid of any familial warmth. It was the look of a predator that had bitten into a stone. "You're a cruel old man," she said. "I am a just man," I replied, "and I am a patient one." I walked past her to the window. I looked out at the garden. The wind was whipping the trees, but they stood firm. "Greed is a poor architect, Jessica," I said, not looking back. "It builds on a foundation of sand. You tried to build a fortune on my grave before I was even in it. Now you have to live in the structure you designed." The silence stretched out, tight and singing like a piano wire. "Come on, Michael," she said. Her voice was flat, defeated. "Let's go." "Dad," Michael started. "Go home, son," I said. I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at him. Not yet. The disappointment was still too fresh, too sharp. "Go home and balance your books." I heard them retreat. The footsteps were heavy, devoid of the frantic energy that had carried them in. The front door opened. Then it slammed. Boom. The impact shuddered through the house. The walls absorbed it, the timber flexing but holding. On the mantelpiece, a silver picture frame, a photo of Martha and me in Cape Cod, 1974, shifted. It rattled and slid sideways, tilting on its axis, threatening to fall. I waited until the sound of their engine faded down the street. I walked over to the fireplace. The fire was crackling, consuming the dry oak logs I had split myself. I reached out and picked up the frame. I wiped a speck of dust from the glass with my thumb. Martha was smiling in the photo, the wind blowing her hair across her face. She looked happy. She looked safe. "We held the line, Marty," I whispered. I set the frame back down. I adjusted it until it was perfectly square, aligned with the edge of the mantel, precise to the millimeter. I stood back and checked the angle. Perfect. The house was quiet again. It was a heavy silence, yes, but it was mine. I picked up my coffee cup. It was still warm. The leaves had begun to turn. It was a slow process this year, a gradual surrender of chlorophyll rather than a sudden snap. The maples on the perimeter, the ones that marked the property line where the survey stakes had once stood, were burning a deep, bruised purple. The oak in the center, the king, was turning a russet gold, dropping acorns that hit the porch roof with the sharp crack of pistol fire. I sat in the wicker chair. It creaked under my weight, a familiar complaint. I had my heavy cardigan on.
the wool scratching comfortably against my neck. On the small table beside me sat a cup of coffee, black, hot. Steam rose from it in a lazy spiral, disappearing into the cool October air. The phone in the kitchen was silent. It had been silent for months. There were no more calls about opportunities, no more frantic inquiries about solutions. Jessica had stopped calling in March after her lawyer explained that the conservation easement was tighter than a drumhead and twice as tough to break. Michael called on birthdays and Father's Day. The conversations were brief, brittle things. We talked about the weather. We talked about the local sports team. We did not talk about the house. Every month, however, a landscaping crew arrived. They were a high-end outfit, greenscapes, the side of their truck red. They mowed the lawn. They pruned the hydrangeas with surgical precision. They mulched the rose beds with premium cedar chips. They did this because they were paid to do it, and the bill went directly to Michael and Jessica. I watched the crew work sometimes. I imagined Jessica signing those checks. I imagined the taste of bile in her mouth as she paid to maintain a garden she had wanted to pave over. It was a petty satisfaction, perhaps, but in a war of attrition, you take your victories where you find them. I lifted the coffee cup. The warmth seeped through the ceramic into my cold fingers. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long, exaggerated shadows across the lawn. The light at this time of year has a specific quality. It is golden and thick, like honey. It gilds everything it touches. It made the old potting shed look noble. It made the grass look like velvet. If things had gone differently, if I had been the weak, confused old man they wanted me to be, this view would not exist. Right where I was looking, there would be a vinyl fence. Beyond it, the back wall of modern farmhouse Unit B. I would be hearing the hum of a stranger's air conditioning unit instead of the wind in the branches. I would be staring at siding, not a horizon. But the horizon was still there. I took a sip. The coffee was bitter, strong, good. I won. That is the objective truth. I played the board, anticipated the moves, and trapped the opponent. The house was safe. The land was locked down in a trust that would outlast my grandchildren. But every victory has a cost. That is the rule of engagement. The cost was the silence. I looked at the empty chair next to me. Martha used to sit there. She would have scolded me for being so hard on the boy. She would have said that family is more important than dirt. But Martha didn't see them bring the brochures. She didn't see the greed in their eyes when they talked about liquidating. She didn't see them treat her legacy like a line item on a spreadsheet. I didn't save the dirt for me. I'm 75. My time on this porch is measured in seasons, not decades. I saved it for the principle. I saved it because some things cannot be bought, and they certainly shouldn't be sold by people who don't know the value of a taproot. A blue jay landed on the railing. It cocked its head, looking at me with a bead-black eye. It was aggressive, loud, and alive. "You're welcome," I said to the bird. It chirped once, a sharp grating sound, and flew off toward the oak tree. I set the cup down. The sun had dipped below the tree line now. The air was cooling rapidly. The winter smell was coming, that crisp, clean scent of frost waiting in the wings. I stood up. My knees protested, a grind of bone on bone, but I straightened my back. I was the steward. That was the word. I wasn't the owner anymore. Technically, the deed belonged to my son, but ownership is a piece of paper. Stewardship is a practice. Stewardship is the act of holding the line. I looked out one last time at the darkening garden. The fireflies were just starting to blink in the tall grass near the fence, tiny, intermittent sparks of light in the gathering gloom. The fortress held. The walls stood. I turned and walked back into the kitchen. I washed my cup and placed it in the drying rack. I checked the lock on the back door, testing the handle. Firm. I walked into the living room and turned on the lamp. The light hit the silver frame on the mantel. I didn't need to straighten it. It was already perfect. "Good night, Marty," I whispered. I sat down in my chair and opened my book. The house settled around me, the timber cooling, the joists shifting. It was a heavy sound, a protective sound. It was the sound of something that wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I.